There's a box of donuts in the very first episode of Dexter, and I think about it more than is probably reasonable. He walks into Miami Metro Homicide with it. He does the rounds, he offers one to Angel Batista, greets him in basic Spanish, does the whole warm colleague routine. He takes them down to the records room and hands one to Camilla Fig and gets a case file out of her in exchange. He works the room the way you'd work a room if you'd spent 20 years learning how, from scratch, on purpose, because none of it came naturally. And it works. Everyone in that building takes the donut. Everyone in that building looks at this pleasant, slightly awkward blood spatter analyst and thinks, well, that's Dexter, everyone except one man. Sergeant James Dokes walks up to that desk, doesn't smile, doesn't do the small talk, asks where the hell he's been, and stares at him a beat too long. And Dexter, in a bit of internal monologue that the show drops in the first 40 minutes and then never quite gets round to answering, asks himself why. In a building full of cops, all of them supposedly with a keen insight into the human soul, why is Dokes the only one who gets the creeps from me? It's a good question. It's the best question the show ever asks. And the answer, as far as I can tell, is that everyone else just wasn't looking. That's what tonight's about. The people who were looking, because there's something about a rewatch that took me 2 full passes through the show before it properly landed. Dexter is not really a show about whether Dexter gets caught. That's the surface of it. Underneath, it's a show about what happens to the people who work it out. And the answer, with some exceptions in the original run, is that it goes badly for them. Some of them get killed, some of them get framed, some of them get discredited. They get told they're grieving or obsessive or jealous or naive or having a breakdown. They get quietly moved to the file room. And then the show spends 2 or 3 seasons proving them right without ever once turning around and admitting it out loud. There's a version of this argument that's about the plot, and I'm not really interested in that version. Yes, the police work is bad. Yes, Miami Metro is possibly the least effective investigative unit in the history of fictional law enforcement. And I say that with a lot of affection. That's a different video, and I've made noises about making it. What I want to do tonight is smaller and I think a bit stranger. I want to go through the people, one by one, and just look at what each of them actually said and when they said it, and whether it was true. Not whether they were nice about it, not whether they had good reasons, just whether they were correct. And a lot of them were. More than I expected, honestly. Some of them were correct in ways that make you wince because they were correct in the first season and nobody in the building could hear them. Now, one thing I should flag before we get going, because it changes how you watch all of this. We are being told the story by Dexter, he narrates it, he picks what we see, and Dexter Morgan has the strongest possible interest in making every single one of these people look wrong. That's not me being clever, that's just how the show is built. So when Doki seems unhinged, or LaGuardia seems obsessive, or Quinn seems bitter, you might want to ask who's doing the framing there. I'll come back to that at the end. I don't want to bang on about it now. Quick housekeeping. This isn't a ranking. Nobody's coming first and nobody's coming 14th. These sit alongside each other and you can take them in any order you like, which is convenient because if you're using this to fall asleep, you're going to take them in whatever order your brain decides to switch off in. I'm going to wander between the original run, New Blood, and Original Sin as we go, because a few of these arcs only make sense if you got all 3 in your head at once. And there are spoilers throughout, for all of it. If you've somehow never seen the show and you're only here for the company at this hour, fair enough. I'm about to comprehensively ruin 8 seasons of television, and none of it will matter much once you're under. If you're new here and this is the sort of thing you'd put on to fall asleep to, there's a subscribe button underneath all this somewhere. Press it, don't press it. It helps me out either way and I won't bring it up again. Right, admin's done. So, let's start where it started. With the one man in the building who never took the donut. I want to start with the elevator, because the elevator is the moment I'd show someone if they'd never watched the show. And I had 30 seconds to explain what Dokes is. It's early. Dexter gets up from wherever he's sitting and walks out. and Dokes follows him. And Dokes asks him what the hell is wrong with him. Dexter says he has to be somewhere. Dokes, properly disgusted now, says they all have somewhere to be and reminds him that he's just found out his friend is going to live. Then he pushes Dexter against the wall and asks him the actual question. Does that make you feel anything at all? And Dexter glares at him and tells him to take his hand off him. And Dokes takes his hand off him and says, just what I always thought, and walks away. That's it. No evidence, no case file, no forensics. A man standing in a corridor running an experiment on another man's face, getting the result he expected and filing it away. So why him? Why is Dokes the only one in that building who can see it, when the building is full of homicide detectives whose entire job is reading people? The answer the show gives you, and I think it's one of the smarter bits of character design in the whole run, is that Dokes isn't reading Dexter as a detective. He's reading him as a soldier. Dokes was Army Special Forces. He's been in places where the rules of engagement were, let's say, flexible. He has killed people. He knows exactly what it looks like on a man's face when he's taken a life and felt something about it that he wasn't supposed to feel. He has, and nobody else in Miami Metro has, the frame of reference. Dexter even throws this back at him later in the cabin, and it's a nasty little scene. He taunts Dokes with the fact that Dokes has more officer-involved shootings than anyone else in the department. And Dokes doesn't deny it. He just says he only kills on the job, which is true, and which is also exactly why he can spot Dexter across a room. He's not looking for evidence of a crime. He's looking at a person and recognizing a shape. That's worth sitting with because it sets a pattern that holds for the entire series, and I'll be coming back to it. The people who get closest to Dexter almost never get there through forensics. They get there because they feel something and then refuse to talk themselves out of it. Everyone else in that building had all the same evidence Dokes had. What they didn't have was the willingness to look at a colleague they liked and think, hang on. And now let's actually do the tally, because I think people remember Dokes as a hunch. And Dokes was not a hunch. Dokes was right about everything. He was right about the hotel cokehead murders in the pilot, and this is the funny one. Dokes insists it's 2 people dead in a drug deal. Dexter reads the spatter and says, no, the man was dispatched fast. The woman was an emotional kill. It's a crime of passion. It's got nothing to do with cocaine. And Dokes calls Dexter's hunch a waste of time. So on that one, technically, Dokes is wrong. I mention it because it's the only one. He was right that Dexter didn't belong in the briefing. He was right to keep him out of it. He was right about the grieving widows thing when Mrs. Donovan is asking about her missing husband, and Dokes wanders over and asks Dexter if he's got a thing for grieving widows and calls him a psycho. And Dexter is standing there in the middle of a police station, reassuring himself that he covered his tracks on the man she's looking for. Dokes is teasing him. Dokes is also, at that exact second, standing next to the man who killed her husband. He was right to put him under surveillance. He was right to follow him. He was right to put a GPS tracker on the boat. And then he was right in the way that actually counts, which is that he drove out to the Everglades on his own, walked up on Dexter carrying Jimenez's body parts down to the water, and drew his gun. That's not a hunch. That's the arrest. Dokes caught him, red-handed in the dark, holding the pieces. Nobody else in the entire original run ever gets that close, and he did it on his own, off the books, with no backup, because he was the only person willing to believe the thing he'd been saying out loud since episode 1. And then Dexter shoots him. Sorry, Dokes shoots Dexter, grazes his thigh, and Dexter gets him in a sleeper hold and puts him in a cage. And that's where it turns from a defeat into something worse. Because Dexter can't do it. He goes out there with the water and the sedative and the tools, fully intending to finish it, and Dokes drops the hairy thing on him they never told you, and Dexter drops the knife and goes off to chase a different thread. He comes back later and Dokes toys with him, tells him he can't do it because he's actually got a conscience. and enjoys watching Dexter get genuinely angry for what might be the first time in the character's life. Doak's line in that cage is the one everyone remembers, and it's the right one to remember. "You're going to have to kill me, Morgan," and Dexter doesn't. He does something considerably nastier. He wipes his prints, puts Doak's prints on his own tools, throws them in the ocean where a diving class will conveniently find them, and lets the FBI do the rest. And the FBI does the rest beautifully because the story fits. Doak's investigated several Bay Harbor butcher victims before they died. Doak's fits the vigilante profile. Doak's just flew out of the country. Doak's had a box of blood slides in the boot of his car at the airport. Dexter sits in the room while Lundy and Matthews lay this out, and he's quietly impressed by how well it hangs together, and he says, and this is the bit that gets me, that he's always sensed something off about Doak's, which would explain why Doak's always antagonized him. He says that out loud in a briefing, and nobody blinks. He doesn't even get to be killed by Dexter in the end. He gets killed by Lila, who found the cabin using Dexter's own sat-nav, listened to a man in a cage tell her the actual truth, that Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher, and then decided she sympathized with Dexter for having to carry such an enormous secret, and left him in there and turned on the gas hob and opened the propane valve. Doak's very nearly gets himself free. He doesn't quite. The cabin goes up, and the last insult, which I don't think the show fully realized was an insult, comes from Masuka. They're cataloging the debris, and Dexter's surprised to hear it's being provisionally listed as a suicide, and Masuka explains why. A killer that intelligent, that resourceful, would never make a mistake as basic as letting propane leak into a room with an open flame. So he must have done it on purpose. He must have known he was about to get caught. Think about that for a second. The department's respect for how good Doak's was at his job is the thing that closes the case against him. His competence is used as evidence of his guilt. If they'd thought less of him, he'd have had a better shot. And here's a detail from season 1 that I think tells you everything about how that department valued the man, and it happens well before any of the butcher business. Doak's gets kidnapped. Carlos Guerrero's men take him outside his own home, and they're about to kill him, and the cops come through the door at the last second and arrest the lot of them. And then Detective McNamara explains it to him. Using him as bait was the plan all along. That was the operation. Nobody told him. They dangled a sergeant in front of a cartel to catch Guerrero dirty-handed, and they didn't mention it to the sergeant. And when Doak's finds out, McNamara's response is that they're even now because Doak's had once had an affair with his sister. That's the department Doak's worked for. That's what he was to them. A useful object with a grudge attached, deployed without consent, settled up against a personal score. And I mentioned it because the frame job in season 2 isn't an aberration. It's the same building doing the same thing. Doak's gets used and then Doak's gets discarded, and both times the people doing it feel entirely justified. When the FBI turns up with a box of slides from his boot, absolutely nobody in that station has to overcome a lifetime of institutional goodwill towards James Doak's, because there wasn't any. He was the angry one. He was the one with the shootings. He was the one almost nobody had a drink with. He'd spent his whole career being the man other people found difficult. And it turns out that being the man other people find difficult is a terrible position to be standing in when somebody needs a villain. Personal opinion, and I'll be direct about it, because I think the fandom gets this one wrong in an interesting way. The cruel thing about Doak's isn't the cage or the explosion. The cruel thing is what happens afterwards. His name becomes the department's shorthand for a monster. For the next 5 seasons, whenever anyone in that building needs to refer to the worst thing that ever happened to Miami Metro, they say his name. Batista, who liked him, will still be shouting it in season 7 as a defense of Dexter. Doak's was right for 2 whole seasons, and his reward was to have his entire life rewritten as the thing he was trying to stop. There's one small detail in the aftermath that I find quite moving, and that the show throws away in about 10 seconds. La Guerta, in the middle of all of it, refusing to accept any of it, going around the department trying to collect donations for his memorial service. Nobody else wants to touch it. He's the Bay Harbor butcher now, and she's standing there with a collection asking people to chip in for a man she knows didn't do it. Which, as it happens, is a good place to go next. A single piece of glass on the floor of a church. That's how it starts. Not a body, not a confession, not a witness. One blood slide in a church, 5 seasons after the man who supposedly made them died in a cabin in the Everglades. And one woman who looks at it and doesn't do the sensible thing, which would have been to file it and go home. I want to be honest about something before I get into Maria LaGuerta, which is that I spent years with a fandom read of her. The obstacle, the politician, the one who blocks Deb, who plays the department like a chessboard, who makes everything about her career. And that read isn't nothing. She does play politics. She does block Deb. She absolutely does make things about her career. But somewhere on the second watch, it stopped being the main thing I noticed about her. And what I noticed instead was this. She is by some distance the best detective in that building. It's not close. And nobody, including the show, ever says so. Start with the first time she was right, because almost nobody credits her for this one, and it's the more impressive of the two. She was right about Dokes. Everyone closed that case. Lundy closed it. Matthews closed it. The FBI closed it, and Deputy Director Adams was satisfied. And Lundy, Frank Lundy, who we'll get to, was forced to agree with him. Dexter closed it, obviously being the one who opened it. The evidence was overwhelming. The slides were in the boot. The body was in the water with Jose Garza's remains floating next to it. It was done. And LaGuerta went no. And the show frames that as grief. She's in denial. She was his partner. She loved him. She can't accept it. That's the reading everyone in the building lands on, including Deb, and it's the reading that gets used against her for the rest of her life. Even Matthews, years later, tells her to her face that she's blind to Dokes' guilt because they were close. But here's the thing, she wasn't in denial. She was right. She was right in season 2, and she stayed right for 5 years, while every single person around her patted her on the arm about it. That's not grief. That's just being correct in a room where nobody wants you to be. Then the slide turns up and off she goes, and her reasoning on this is genuinely lovely, and I want to walk through it slowly because it's the only bit of properly clean deduction anyone runs on this man in the entire original run. Deb tries to talk her out of it. Deb points out that Travis Marshall wasn't cut into pieces and put into bags, so it doesn't fit the Bay Harbor butcher at all. Fair point. And LaGuerta's answer is that it can't be a copycat either because the blood slides were never released to the public. Nobody outside the department knew the butcher kept trophies, so it isn't a copycat, and it isn't a coincidence, and it isn't Travis, which leaves exactly one thing it can be. He's alive, he's still killing, and he was never Dokes. She gets there with less information than anyone else in the show, and she gets there in one conversation in her own office with the door closed using a private lab because she doesn't trust her own department, which, given that her own department contains the man she's looking for, is the single most correct decision anyone in this entire show ever makes. And then it builds. Lundy's old notebook on her desk. The list of people connected to the reopened Bay Harbor butcher investigation who fit the victim profile, she's planning to dig into every single one, which is exactly right, and which is exactly why Deb panics and offers to help so she can steer it. She gets to Philip Barnes. Dexter stalked Barnes at a wedding reception. There might be a photograph. She's closing in on a man through a wedding album. And then Estrada, which is the part I think is properly clever. She doesn't just gather evidence. She sets a trap using the one thing she's worked out about him, that this is personal, that it's about the container, about his mother. She dangles one of the men who killed Laura Moser and she waits. But the scene I actually love in all of this isn't LaGuerta's, it's Matthews. Because Matthews gets there too. Matthews, of all people, sits Dexter down on his boat while hanging Christmas lights, which is somehow the most Miami Metro image the show ever produced, and lays out the entire profile. He tells him LaGuerta thinks he's the butcher. And then he does the thing, casually, like he's musing. He knows Dexter's life story. He knows what he saw in that cargo container. Most people, that'd screw them up for life. And your brother went through the same thing you did, and look what happened to him. He saw your mother dismembered in front of him, and he grew up to dismember his own victims. The Bay Harbor butcher also dismembered his victims. Of course, your brother wasn't the butcher. The murders continued after he died. But it's weird, huh? And then the kicker. Another thing that's weird, that cabin where Dokes died. It was rented to a man named Jimenez. He was one of the men who killed your mother. What are the odds? That is a complete and correct profile of Dexter Morgan, assembled out loud by a captain on a boat at Christmas. Every piece is in the right place. And then Dexter feeds him a story about seeing Dokes on a boat at Coral Cove Marina and being too frightened to come forward, and Matthews, who has just built the case himself, unprompted, says he'll get Maria to move on. He talks himself out of it. He does the whole thing and then he puts it down because he likes the Morgans and because Harry was his friend and because the alternative is unthinkable. That's the show in miniature. It's not that nobody can see it. It's that everybody who sees it decides they'd rather not have. And the other thing working against her, which she never once suspects, is that her own investigation has a hole in it. And the hole is the person helping her. Because Deb offers to help. That's how she plays it. She goes to La Guerta. She's sympathetic. She asks how it's going. And La Guerta hands her the file. Gladly, for her eyes only. And Deb walks out of that office and into a lift and swears at the wall for about 15 seconds. That's the thing that finishes La Guerta in the end. Not Dexter. She's not being outwitted by the Bay Harbor butcher. She's being quietly steered by the one colleague she trusted enough to bring in. Deb takes the Barnes interview off her so La Guerta never gets to the wedding photographs. Deb goes and plants the Marina evidence herself because she doesn't want Harrison growing up without a father. Every single time La Guerta reaches for the next rung, there's a Morgan there first, sanding it down. She's running a flawless investigation inside a building where two of the people helping her are actively working against her, and one of them is the killer. And then there's Matthews at her house, which is a rough scene. Matthews turns up and tells her she's blind to Dokes' guilt because they were close, and she tells him he's letting his personal feelings for the Morgans cloud his judgment. They're both right. That's the awful bit. They're both completely right about each other at the same time in the same conversation, and neither of them can hear it, except only one of them happens to also be right about the murders. And she insists that she'd have known if Dokes had a boat, and Matthews goes, well, call it a wild guess, but if he was using it to dump bodies into the ocean, he'd probably have kept it quiet. That's a good line. It's also a man arguing himself further into a position he'd correctly abandoned about a week earlier while hanging Christmas lights. And so it comes down to her, which brings us to the arrest, and the arrest is a very strange bit of television. She walks into his flat with two officers while Jamie's cleaning up and Harrison's playing on the floor. She marches him through the station in handcuffs in front of everyone. And when she says she has proof that he's the Bay Harbor butcher, Batista, good, decent, loyal Angel Batista, asks her if she's lost her mind. Because Dokes is the Bay Harbor butcher. Everybody knows that. Deb tries to get the cuffs off him and gets told to stand down and recuse herself because she's family. She is standing in a room full of police officers holding a correct conclusion, and every single one of them thinks she's ill. And I want to be precise about how it ends because I think the precision matters. Dexter didn't kill her. Deb did. She was so completely right that the show couldn't get out of it with a plot twist. There was no clever escape available. The only way for Dexter to walk out of that shipping container was for a good cop who loved her brother to pick up a gun and shoot her colleague in the chest. That's the price of La Guerta being right, and the show makes Deb pay it, and Deb never recovers from it. Everything that happens to that character in Season 8 starts in that room. I'll keep this bit short because I don't want to labor it. Maria La Guerta was right in Season 2, and she was right in Season 7, and in between she was told by everyone she worked with that she was emotional, that she was obsessed, that she was blinded by loyalty. and that she needed to move on. And every single time, the person telling her that was wrong and she was right. Her only real mistake was being correct in a room where the main character needed to remain free. She's also the second person to die inside a story that Dokes started. That's not going to be the last time I say that about somebody. Right? Let's not do the recap for this one. You know Deb, everybody knows Deb. I want to talk instead about a pattern. And the pattern starts about 11 minutes into the first episode and never once breaks. It's this. Deb Morgan has the correct instinct, says it out loud, and gets told to sit down. The founding example is the refrigerated truck, and I think it's one of the great throwaway bits of writing in the pilot. They're at lunch. She mentions that one of the bodies felt ice cold. She uses the term cell crystallization. Dexter, and I want to be fair, this is Dexter's leap, not hers, runs with it and speculates that the killer's using a refrigerated truck to move the parts. And then Deb takes it into the briefing in front of the room and puts it on the table. And La Huerta shoots her down. They find the truck. Obviously, they find the truck. The entire first season antagonist, the biggest thing the show ever did, the villain people still talk about 18 years later. The ice truck killer gets his name from a theory that Deb Morgan was told in front of her colleagues to drop. And then it just keeps happening. That's the thing. It's not a one-off, it's the architecture of the character. She's put on surveillance duty. She's put on vice. She's put in the file room at one point for an incident where Angel's own report backed her version of events and the higher-ups backed Maria anyway. She spots that Cole Harmon should never have been excluded from the Barrel Girls suspect list, which cracks the case open, and she has to take it to Batista to take it to La Huerta to try to get it reopened, because her own read isn't enough on its own. Her instincts are correct. Her rank is wrong. And in a police department, one of those two things decides what happens next, and it isn't the instincts. Now the Hannah thing, because that's the cleanest short version of it. Deb doesn't trust Hannah Mouquet. She says so. She's investigating her, and Angel feels guilty about not telling Dexter they're looking at his girlfriend. And Deb says it's her call. Everyone treats this as Deb being protective or bitter or unable to let her brother have anything. And then Hannah dissolves pills into her water so she'll pass out behind the wheel and drive off the road. She was right. She was right within a handful of episodes. In the most literal way it's possible to be right, the woman she didn't trust tried to kill her. And I'd argue she still doesn't really get credited for it, because by then everyone's decided Deb's judgment about her brother's life is compromised. And this is the part I find hardest about her. Deb was right about everyone, every single time, except the one person she was never allowed to be right about. She had a blind spot for Dexter, and this is the bit that gets me. Dexter knew about the blind spot. He says it out loud to Lumen in season 5. She's asking him whether Deb has ever suspected anything about what he does, and Dexter thinks about it and concludes that his sister has a blind spot for him. And then he decides that's for the best, because she's not like them. That's not a coincidence. That's not luck. His sister loved him enough not to look, and he knew it, and he used it. It was an operational asset. The single most effective piece of cover Dexter Morgan ever had wasn't the forensics job or the boat or the code. It was Deb's love for him. He was running his entire life on the back of the one thing she couldn't be objective about, and he was fully aware of it the whole time. And when it finally breaks, the church, the end of season 6, Deb walking in on her brother mid-kill, it doesn't liberate her. It destroys her. She gets the correct information at last, and it takes her apart. Her position in season 7 is the other thing I want to flag, because the show treats it as a breakdown, and it isn't. It's an argument, and it's a coherent one. Her position is, this cannot be managed. This cannot be contained. You cannot put a code on this and call it handled. And every single thing that happens for the next 2 seasons proves her right. She tries to control it, then she tries to help. Then she's planting evidence in a marina to shore up the frame job on a dead man, and then she's in a shipping container with a gun in her hand looking at her captain. She was right. It couldn't be managed. It ended badly for everyone. And there's a line of hers from that stretch that I think is the best summary of her whole predicament that anybody ever wrote, and it's a swear word. She finds out about the slide in the church, and she goes straight to Dexter, and she tells him they're in a storm of fuck. Not you, not I, we. That's the moment it's over for her, and it's about 1 season before she dies. Because the second she says we, she's not a detective anymore. She's an accessory who happens to have a badge. And the rest of it follows automatically, the double agenting of La Guerta's file, the taking of the Barnes interview, the trip out to the marina to plant evidence supporting a frame job on a dead man she'd personally called a good man about a fortnight earlier. And I want to be careful here, because it'd be easy to make that sound like a fall, and I don't think it is. Watch what she's actually doing in those scenes. She's not enabling him. She's trying to run damage control on something she has correctly assessed as uncontainable. She insists on planting the marina evidence herself over his objections, and her stated reason is that she doesn't want Harrison growing up without a father. That's not somebody who's lost her judgment. That's somebody applying perfectly sound judgment to a situation where every available option is a disaster, and she's picking the smallest one. She was right about the situation, she was right about the risk, she was right about the ending. And being right about all 3 of those things is exactly what put her in a shipping container with a gun in her hand. There's a bleak little detail in there that I keep noticing. Right in the middle of all of it, Jamie takes a photograph. Harrison, Dexter, and Deb with Santa. That's happening on the same day as the marina conversation. That's the same afternoon. A family Christmas photo and an evidence-planting logistics chat back-to-back in the same shopping center. That's Deb's entire life in season 7 in one image, and nobody in the frame is smiling for the reason you'd think. Personal opinion. I think Deb's the most tragic character in the show, and I don't think it's especially close. And the reason isn't the ending. The reason is that she spent her whole career being the best instinctive investigator in that department, and being systematically told her instincts were emotions. And then she was proved right about literally everything, all at once, in a church, at the worst possible moment. She didn't get vindicated, she got hit with all of it in one go. Which is not really how being right is supposed to work. I want to slow right down for this one, because Rita's sections of the show move at a different speed to everything else, and I think the register matters. There's a texture to Rita's life on this show. The house with the 2 kids in it, the school runs, the hotel shifts, the neighbors, the perpetual low-grade wreckage of Paul Bennett, and then the perpetual low-grade wreckage of Paul Bennett's absence. Cody wanting hot chocolate, Astor answering the phone, dinner happening more or less on time. It's the only part of the show that runs on ordinary hours, and it's deliberately shot warm and a bit soft. And I think that's why people underrate what's actually going on in it. Because underneath all of that, Rita Bennett spends 4 years being right. Not right about the conclusion. She never gets the conclusion. Right about the thing that actually matters, which is that there was always something wrong. And I want to be firm about this, because the fandom read of Rita is that she was naive, that she was oblivious, that she was the one who couldn't see what was in front of her. And I think that read is upside down. Rita's instinct fires correctly every single time. Every time she notices, she asks, she gets a plausible answer from the man who has spent his entire adult life constructing plausible answers, and she puts it down. The addiction storyline is the cleanest example of it, and it's the one I always come back to. Season 2. Rita has clocked that Dexter's hiding something, which, again, she is right about, and Dexter needs a cover, and the cover he goes with is that he's a drug addict. Now, Rita lived with Paul Bennett, not a casual user, a serious, violent addict whose behavior dismantled her family. She has seen this from the inside, up close, for years. She knows the physical signs. She knows the mood swings, the incoherent stretches, the withdrawal, the way the whole house has to organize itself around one person's chemistry. She is, of everyone in the entire cast, uniquely qualified to detect exactly the lie Dexter has chosen to tell her. And Dexter displays none of it. Not one sign, nothing, and she takes it. You can argue the cover, he's early in it, he's in recovery, whatever, sure. But the show establishes her on purpose as someone whose hard-won instincts about this specific thing would be screaming, and then just quietly declines to have them scream. It's a plot convenience, and I don't hate it, but it does tell you something about how the show wanted Rita used. Her noticing was allowed. Her acting on it was not. Then there's the landlord, which is a smaller moment and honestly a better one. She's rushing the kids out of the door to get to the hospital. Dexter's phone starts ringing. Astor picks it up, and it's his landlord calling about a problem in his flat. His flat, the one he told Rita he'd got rid of. So she turns up at the hospital and mentions, entirely without malice, that she'd have been there sooner if she hadn't been busy talking to his landlord. And Dexter is completely blindsided. He's caught. There's a beat where the whole thing could go. He mumbles something about holding on to it for the security deposit, which doesn't remotely explain why he said he'd got rid of it, and he knows it doesn't. And Rita says, let's talk about it at a better time. Anton says that family comes first. She catches him, and then she puts it down. That's the whole character in one exchange, and I don't think it's a failure of hers. I think it's what it actually looks like when someone has built their entire life on not being able to afford another catastrophe. She catches him, and she chooses in about a second and a half that she is not going to pull that thread today. And then, of course, the show does the thing it does with Rita, which is that it only tells you how bad it was after she's dead. The first date flashback. It comes in during the funeral episode, which is the cruelest possible placement. Dexter's sitting in the restaurant, already there, and she arrives late and apologizes. She asks how he found such an out-of-the-way spot, and he says he tracked it down. She talks about the menu. She mentions his sister has told her all about him, and he asks, deadpan, whether she left out the bit about him being an axe murderer. And he's not there for her. He's there because there's a man at another table he's been watching. Halfway through, he excuses himself, goes out into the car park, drugs the man, puts him in the boot of his car, comes back in, and tells Rita he's got a stomach bug and leaves. That's date one. She's sitting alone at a table with a menu while he loads a body into a car. Everything that follows, the marriage, the kids, the house, all of it, is built on top of that evening. And the show waits until she's in a bathtub to show it to us. Personal opinion, and I feel reasonably strongly about it. Rita wasn't naive. Rita was lied to continuously for 4 years by a professional. A man with a forensics background, institutional cover, police credentials, a police officer for a sister, and a lifetime of practice at exactly this. Nobody in that position works it out. Dokes only worked it out because Dokes had a frame of reference from a war. Rita's frame of reference was a normal life, which is precisely the thing Dexter was best at counterfeiting. She was right that there was something wrong. She was right every single time she asked. She just never got a true answer once from the day they met. And the show's response to her being right was to prove it in the worst way available to it. The bathtub, Harrison sitting in the blood. I'm not going to dwell on that. You've seen it, and tonight isn't the night for it, but I'll say the obvious thing, which is that the thing Rita kept sensing and kept putting down was exactly the thing that killed her. She was correct about the danger. She was just never told which direction it was coming from. This one's short. Some of them are. Cody's got a Mickey Mouse hat. They've just come back from Disney World with Paul's parents, and they come charging into the flat, and Cody puts the hat on Dexter's head, and it's got his name on it. And there's a second one, for Rita, and Astor is looking around the room for her mum. Dexter tells them he does it badly. He uses the funeral director's line, the one he'd been quietly marveling at earlier because he hasn't got one of his own. I'm sorry for your loss. He borrows a stranger's condolence and hands it to two children about their mother. And Aster pulls the hat off his head and storms out. He finds her sitting on the curb, and she tells him he doesn't care that her mother's dead. She tells him he didn't protect her mother. And then she says the thing. She says the family would have been better off if her mother had never met him. That's it. That's the section. A 12-year-old, in the middle of the worst day of her life, delivers the most accurate one-sentence summary of this entire show that anybody ever manages. And she does it while crying on a curb outside a block of flats. And I want to flag the tell because the tell is the good bit. Dexter agrees with her. He goes back inside and he's standing over Harrison's cot, and he says it, like your sister says, "I'm toxic. You'd all be better off without me." He doesn't argue with it. He doesn't rationalize it. He doesn't do the thing he does with literally everyone else, which is find the angle that makes him the reasonable one. He just takes it, repeats it back to his infant son, and files it. And then he does absolutely nothing about it for the rest of his life. That's what I find remarkable about Aster's line. It's not that she worked something out that nobody else could. She didn't work anything out. She had no information. She wasn't investigating. She was a grieving kid being angry at the nearest available adult. And she happened to be angry in exactly the right direction, and the man she was angry at knew it. There's a thing this show does a lot with children, and it mostly doesn't work. Kids get deployed as moral instruments, as the pure thing, the innocent thing, the mirror. It usually feels a bit manufactured. This one works, and I think it works for exactly one reason. She isn't making an argument. She's not trying to convince him of anything. She's just furious and correct at the same time. And those two things have nothing to do with each other. No notes, honestly. It's a really good scene. Here's a small detail that I think rounds her off nicely. Aster gets one more go at being right later in the season 5 material, and it's quieter. She's a teenager by then, she's been drinking, she's angry, and the household she's looking at is a man, a dead woman's baby, and a strange woman that the baby has started calling mama. And Aster says the obvious thing out loud, "She's not your mama's dead," and then she leaves. She's the only Bennett who gets out under her own power. Rita didn't get to leave. Cody was a kid. Aster looked at that house, decided it was broken, and went. Fair enough, really. Let's do this one through an object, because the object outlives the man by a good while and does more damage than he ever did. Frank Lundy kept a notebook. That's the thing to hold on to, because when we meet him, he's the FBI's specialist brought in on the Bay Harbor Butcher, and he is, I'll say it plainly, the single best profiler the show ever put on screen, which is a slightly odd thing to say about a man who spends most of his screen time being wrong about who he's looking for. His profile is perfect. Genuinely, completely perfect. He's looking for a vigilante, someone who kills people who deserve it, by his own reckoning, someone with a code, meaning someone who selects rather than compulses. This isn't a man being driven, this is a man choosing. Someone who takes trophies. Dexter's sitting in that room, and Lundy's basically reading his diary out loud, and the only reason Dexter isn't sweating is that Lundy has hung the wrong face on it. That's the wrinkle I find genuinely fascinating about Lundy, and I've never seen anyone else make much of it. Dokes had the man and no profile. Lundy had the profile and no man. Dokes knew from the corridor, from the elevator, from looking at a face, but Dokes couldn't tell you what he was looking at. He had no theory, he just had a certainty and a stare. Meanwhile, Lundy had built an exact photo fit of Dexter Morgan's psychology and had absolutely no idea whose face to put on it. If those two men had sat down for 10 minutes and compared notes, the show ends in season 2. That's it. That's the whole thing. Lundy describes the profile. Doak says, "Funny, that's the blood guy," and it's over before the credits. They never do. Lundy's suspicion lands on Dokes, and it lands there, ironically, partly because Dokes fits the profile Lundy built. A man with a code, a man who selects, a man with the training, a man who was around several of the victims before they died. Lundy's own excellence walks him straight into the frame job. He's forced to agree with Adams in the end, and I always think there's something in how the show plays that. forced. He doesn't like it. He just can't argue with what's in front of him because what's in front of him was arranged by the man he's been briefing every morning. And there's one detail in the middle of the frame job that I think is the single funniest thing the show ever did by accident. Once the case lands on Dokes, Lundy puts a protective FBI detail on Dexter. Because Dexter might be in danger, you see. There's a trained killer out there with a grudge, and Dexter's the analyst who processed his slides, so Lundy, being thorough, being careful, being good at his job, arranges for federal agents to stand outside the man's flat and keep him safe. The best profiler in the show assigns armed protection to the Bay Harbor butcher to guard him from the innocent man he framed, and Dexter, who has an errand, asks him to pull it off. And Lundy agrees, and Deb objects, and Dexter argues that a trained killer like Dokes wouldn't be daft enough to break cover over a grudge, which is a genuinely good piece of reasoning delivered by a man who wants the agents gone so he can climb out of a window and take a boat to the Everglades, which he then does. The other thing Lundy does in that stretch, and it's less funny, is roll straight over La Guerta. She's outraged that he's putting the Dokes story out to the press, and he tells her to cooperate or consider her employment. That's Lundy at his worst, and it isn't malice. It's just a competent man following a clean line of reasoning through a case that has been carefully arranged for him and flattening the one person in the building who's right on his way through. Then season 4, and this is the one people forget. He comes back, he's retired, he's not on a case, he's on a hunch, and the hunch is that there's a killer who's been working for decades, in cycles, all over the country, and nobody's ever joined the dots because nobody's ever looked at it as one thing. That's Trinity. He's right. He is completely, entirely right about Trinity, at a point where the actual homicide department has no idea Trinity exists. And the reaction he gets is, roughly, "That's nice, Frank. He's a retired bloke with a hobby. He's Deb's ex. He's a man in a hotel room with a corkboard. Nobody's especially interested. And then he's shot early by someone else entirely because of his Trinity investigation and her need to protect her father. That's it. That's how he goes. He's a bystander in a different plot." Deb's line about it afterwards has stuck with me for years. She's in the hospital bed on the painkillers, tired, and she says Lundy had a look in his eyes like he was apologizing. Personal opinion. Lundy's the most efficient tragedy in the show, and I don't think anyone talks about him enough. He was right about the butcher's mind. He was right about Trinity's existence. He wrote it all down. He was murdered for reasons entirely unrelated to any of it, by a woman with a grudge about a different case. And that is quite a fate for a man whose entire skill was seeing patterns. There's a smaller thing about Lundy that I want to mention because it's the only warm bit in his whole run and it doesn't get enough air. He was right about Deb, not in a case sense, in the other sense. Lundy is, as far as I can tell, the only person in the entire show who looks at Deborah Morgan and treats her instincts as a professional asset rather than a personality problem. He doesn't tell her to sit down. He gives her the La Guerta confrontation because she knows La Guerta better than he does and because it'll be good practice for her. He talks to her like a colleague who's going to be better at this than he is in about 10 years. Everyone else in that building spent seasons telling her she was emotional. Lundy turns up for about 18 episodes and treats her like a detective, and she's a better one for the rest of the show because of it. And then he tells her he's leaving once the butcher case closes, which she takes badly and which is fair enough, because everyone else in her life who takes her seriously has a tendency to die. But it's the notebook that finishes it, because the notebook doesn't die with him. It sits somewhere for a few years, and then it turns up on a desk in Miami Metro. And the person whose desk it turns up on is the one person in that building who never accepted that the case was closed. He was right. He wrote it down. And the thing he wrote it down in got the next person killed too. The thing that gets me about Quinn is that we find out he's right through a conversation about a row. Deb's telling Dexter she can't come to Harrison's birthday in Orlando because she's busy. And then it comes out she and Quinn have had a fight because Quinn thought Dexter was connected to Rita's murder. And she didn't tell Dexter about it, she says, because he's been through enough. Sit with the shape of that for a second. A detective develops a theory. But Quinn's theory about Dexter's connection to Rita's murder is actually wrong, and it never reaches anyone, because the person it reaches first decides to be kind about it. Now I know Quinn. Quinn is written to be a bit of a mess. He's dirty adjacent, he's slippery, he's sleeping with the sister of the man he's investigating, which is an ethical situation I'd struggle to describe in polite terms. He tells Deb she's more like a guy because she doesn't play games, which is possibly the worst compliment ever paid to a woman on television. He's not the hero of anything, and he is also, on the actual question in front of him, doing perfectly ordinary police work and getting perfectly ordinary results. Look at what he actually does. He goes to Rita's neighbor and gets the story about Dexter punching a man for kissing her. He clocks that Rita and Elliot had a fling and that Dexter found out about it. He's building motive. That's the job. That is literally the job. And his line to La Guerta about it is one of my favorites in the whole run, because it's the show being honest about itself for about 4 seconds. He says, look, if this were anyone but Dexter, we'd at least be thinking like detectives. Which is correct. It's just correct. If a woman is murdered in a bathtub in her own home and her husband was having an affair-adjacent crisis and had recently assaulted a neighbor over her, you look at the husband. That's not a wild theory. That's page 1. The only reason nobody looks at Dexter is that Dexter is Dexter, and everyone in that building has known him for years, and he brings donuts. And then it goes further than anyone else ever gets, and this is the bit people forget. Quinn hires Stan Liddy. And Liddy, who's shady, who's been terminated, who wants his job back and doesn't much care how, actually does it. He rigs surveillance, and Dexter and Lumen catch it by accident on a baby monitor of all things, picking up the feed, and Dexter goes looking and finds a recording device in a lamp with a Miami Metro property tag on it, and realizes the worst possible thing. It isn't Jordan Chase watching him. It's someone in his own department. And what does Liddy have? He has photographs of Dexter and Lumen dumping bags into the ocean. That's it. That's the closest anybody in the entire original run ever comes to a conviction. Not a hunch, not a profile, not a feeling in a corridor, photographs of the act, a man in a van with pictures. And then watch how it collapses, because it's almost funny. Liddy has no warrant, so the pictures are useless on their own. So he needs a confession, so he tasers Dexter and throws him in the back of the van and starts recording and offers him a deal, confess, and Lumen walks. And Dexter kicks him in the face and stabs him in the chest. And then Quinn, who has by this point gone off the whole thing, and Dexter notes it, he clocks that Quinn no longer supports Liddy's investigation. Quinn turns up at the van looking for him, tries the locked doors, leaves an angry voicemail, and walks away. And a drop of Liddy's blood leaks out of the van and lands on his shoe. He doesn't notice. And that drop of blood is what finishes him. Because when they find Liddy dead in his own van, the last 5 calls on the phone are to Quinn, and Quinn's name is on the requisition forms for the surveillance kit. And the only prints in the van are Liddy's and Quinn's, and La Guerta spots the blood on his shoe and he asks for a lawyer. The show flips him from investigator to suspect in a single scene. He goes into that plot as the man who's right and comes out of it as the man in the interrogation room with the camera off, telling Deb it isn't what it looks like, which it also isn't, but nobody's ever going to believe that either. And there's a scene in the fallout that I find quietly awful, and it's not Quinn's fault, and it's not Deb's either. Deb goes into the interrogation room and turns the camera off. That's a big thing for her. That's her putting her career on the table for him. And she presses him, just tell me what happened, and he won't. He says he should keep his mouth shut. He says it isn't what it looks like. And she gets nothing, and she gets up, and on the way out, she turns the camera back on. And what's actually happening in that room, if you stand outside it, is that Deborah Morgan is trying to rescue the one man in Miami who correctly identified her brother from a murder charge arising directly out of him having correctly identified her brother. Nobody in that room knows that. Both of them think they're having a completely different conversation. And La Huerta, meanwhile, is telling Deb to have faith in him and not assume the worst, which is, again, the correct instinct from the person whose correct instincts nobody ever acts on. The other detail I keep chewing on is that Quinn deletes Liddy's messages off his phone. He does it early, before he knows the man's dead. He's covering for a thing he didn't do, out of pure reflex because he knows how it looks. And it's that reflex, not the theory, that finishes him. He behaved like a guilty man about the one thing he was innocent of, and the one thing he was right about went in the bin alongside it. Personal opinion. Quinn is written to be unlikable specifically so that we'll dismiss his conclusion, and I want to be honest, it worked on me for years. I watched season 5 and thought, oh, Quinn's being a prick again, he's jealous, he's got a chip on his shoulder about the Golden Morgans. And then I watched it again, and he's a detective with a motive, a theory, and photographic evidence. And he's completely correct, and he's going about it in the stupidest possible way, and all three of those things are true at once. And the cost, he loses Deb's trust. He nearly loses his badge. A man dies in a van because of a plan he set in motion and then abandoned. And then he drops it. Completely. He's in the show for 3 more seasons, and he never mentions it again. That's the bit that actually bothers me. The show doesn't just discredit him, it makes him let go. There's a woman in a basement in Miami who spent years quietly noticing. Camilla Fig runs records. That's it. That's the job. She sits in a room full of files and hands them out to people who need them. And one of the people who needs them is a cheerful young blood spatter analyst who comes down with donuts, and that's their entire relationship, more or less. He brings pastry, she picks one out, then she rolls her chair back and finds him a file. And one day before she hands it over, she says the line, "One of these days, you're going to tell me." That's it. She says it with a smile. It's not an accusation. There's no menace in it. It's the tone you'd use with a colleague who's got a running joke you're not in on yet. And Dexter does the thing he does, which is produce the plausible answer. Blood spatter doesn't take up all my time. I like doing it. Maybe I can help out. It fills my nights. And she says he's got a morbid sense of fun. And he agrees with her, and that's the scene. It's about 40 seconds long. Now, what does she actually write about? Because it's smaller and stranger than everything else in this script, and I've been trying to work out how to describe it. She isn't investigating. She has no theory. She doesn't suspect him of anything. In the sense of suspecting, she's not building towards an arrest. She's not going to walk into La Huerta's office. She has simply been sitting in a basement for a number of years watching a forensics technician request over and over again on his lunch break the files of the most appalling offenders in the city. Rapists, murderers, people who walked on technicalities. He asks for the worst ones. He asks for them specifically. He asks for them a lot, and she has noticed. And she has decided in her own quiet way that there's something he isn't saying and that one day he'll say it. And until then, she'll keep handing over the files. Which brings me to the part that I think is one of the best small ironies the show ever built, and it never once draws attention to it. Camilla is a supplier. Every file she hands across that desk is a target. She's not an obstacle to Dexter's operation. She's the single most useful person in it. He couldn't do what he does without her, and she has no idea, and she never finds out. And she keeps doing it for years because a nice young man from upstairs brings her a donut and asks nicely. The whole code, the entire machinery of it, the boat and the tools and the plastic, none of that works without an information source. And the information source is Camilla, a woman in the records room who likes him. Personal opinion, and it's a soft one. She never gets a scene where she puts it together. She's not written to. She's not that kind of character, and honestly, the show would have ruined her if it had tried. The version of Camilla, who has a big realization scene in the records room, is a worse character than the version who just gently says one thing and lets it sit there. But the fact that a records clerk gets one throwaway line that lands harder than most of the interrogations in the entire show, that's the sort of thing I only noticed on the second watch. First time through, you're watching Dexter be charming. Second time through, you're watching a woman politely waiting for a confession that never comes. Her ending is a hard one, and I'm not going to walk through it, partly because it deserves better than a summary, and partly because I'd want a whole evening to do it properly. What I'll say is that she's one of the very few people in the entire run who gets something like the truth out of him. And she gets it because he chose to give it, and not because she caught him, which, given everything else we've talked about tonight, is an extraordinarily rare way to end up in that man's orbit. She asked more than once, nicely, and then she waited. Right, Harry. Harry's the difficult one, and he's difficult because his correctness is the most catastrophic thing in the entire franchise, and the show takes about 6 seasons to work up to admitting it. Let me put the problem plainly. Harry Morgan was right. He looked at a small boy who'd been found sitting in 2 inches of his mother's blood in a shipping container, took him home, watched him for a few years, and made a diagnosis. And the diagnosis was, this cannot be fixed. Not with love, not with time, not with therapy, not with a normal life. Something has been done to this child, or something was always in this child, and it is not going away, and pretending otherwise is going to get somebody killed. Nobody else in the entire franchise makes that call that early or that accurately, not the social workers, not Doris, nobody. Harry looks at the situation in about 1991 and gets it exactly right. And then he is catastrophically, world-endingly wrong about what to do next. Because the code isn't containment. That's the thing. Everybody talks about the code as a leash, as a set of restrictions, and Harry certainly sold it to himself that way. He says it out loud in a flashback, when a young Dexter ambushes him and chokes him, and then cheerfully announces that he won, and Harry has to pull him up short and tell him it's not a game, that this is the only way he knows to keep him out of an electric chair. That's Harry's whole theory. Containment, damage limitation. And what he actually built was a training program. He didn't build a leash, he built a career. He taught a child how to select, how to prepare, how to dispose, and then, and this is the bit that's genuinely astonishing when you lay it out, he got him a job in forensics so he'd have access to the case files. Harry didn't just fail to stop it, Harry professionalized it. And then there's the reveal, which recontextualizes the whole man, and which the show does through Dokes in a cage, which is a delicious bit of construction. Dokes taunts him with it. They never told you. And Dexter can't leave it alone. He drops the knife, he goes back to Miami, he starts pulling the thread, he goes to Matthews and dances around it, and eventually Matthews just tells him. It wasn't heart disease. Harry overdosed on his own heart medication. Shortly before he did it, he asked Matthews cryptically to watch over Dexter and Deb. The autopsy said what it said, and Matthews buried it to protect them both. So, Harry Morgan was the first person to correctly identify what Dexter was, and the first person to correctly identify what he had made, and the second one killed him. The author of the code was its first casualty. And Dexter reels at that, and I think it's one of Michael C. Hall's best bits of work in the show. The flat, blank incomprehension. He cannot make it fit. Harry, the determined policeman. Harry, the man with the rules. Harry, the reason all of this is survivable. Harry, killing himself quietly because he couldn't live in a world with the thing he'd built in it. That's the darkest kind of being right there is. Harry was right about what he'd done. He just had nobody to tell. Now, original sin, because this is where it gets properly good, and I don't think enough people have gone back for it. The prequel does something quietly devastating with Harry, and it's this. It shows him being wrong about a friend. Dexter tells him Spencer's dangerous. Dexter has read the situation, and he's read it correctly, and he brings it to Harry, and Harry doesn't listen. Because Spencer's his mate. Lifelong, you don't look at your mates that way, and a kid stays missing longer than he needed to. And afterwards, Harry says it out loud to his son. He regrets not listening. He acknowledges that Nicky would have been rescued earlier if he had. And then he has to sit with the fact that a man he'd known his whole life turned out to be a monster, and he's shaken by it. Properly shaken. Personal opinion, and this is the thing I want to land Harry on. The most honest thing Original Sin does is show us Harry failing to see a monster standing next to him, in exactly the way that every single person in Miami Metro will later fail to see one standing next to them. Same failure, same reason. He liked him. It runs in that building. It always ran in that building. Harry started it. One more and then I'll leave him. Harry was right about the other son as well. He clocked Brian. He watched a boy try to smother a crying infant, Deborah. Watched him go for Harry himself when he got told off. Watched him put a window through and made the call. This one is a danger to my daughter. And he sent him away. That was correct. And it was correct on almost no evidence, and it was fast. And then, this is in the flashbacks. Harry works out, years later, while investigating the murders, that Brian was present at every single one of the crime scenes. Every one. He gets it. He sits at Bobby's hospital bed and confides it to an unconscious man because he's got nobody else to say it to. And Bobby surfaces just long enough to tell him to save Dexter. He was right about that son too. He just never followed it up because he was busy with the other one. That's Harry, really, a man with excellent instincts and a genius for choosing the wrong thing to do about them. Right? I'm going to say something uncomfortable, and then I'm going to say the caveat once, and then I'm not going to keep saying it because I find that sort of hand-wringing tedious, and I assume you're an adult. The ice truck killer had the most accurate read on Dexter Morgan of anyone in the entire series. The caveat, this is not a defense of Brian Moser. Brian Moser dismembered women and laid their parts out under a Christmas tree with presents. He filmed one of them reading a message while she hung upside down. He is not a misunderstood figure, and I'm not doing that thing. Right, that said, moving on. I'll put my opinion on the table now rather than saving it for the end, because it's the reason I wanted to do this section at all. I think Brian's the best villain the show ever had. I'd hear an argument for Trinity, and I'd probably lose it graciously and then go on thinking what I think. And the reason isn't the theater of him, not the tableaus, not the ice, not the presence under the tree. It's that his pitch is entirely reasonable on its own terms. He isn't offering chaos. He's offering honesty. He's saying, I'm the only person alive who knows what you are, so come and be it. Stop pretending we're the same. Nobody else is ever going to know you like I do. Hold that in your head while I go through the rest of it, because everything he turns out to be right about is downstream of that one offer. What's remarkable about Brian when you go back to season 1 with everything you know now is how quickly he gets there. Everyone else in Miami is looking at a mildly awkward bloke from the lab. Rita's looking at a boyfriend who's a bit odd about intimacy. Deb's looking at her brother. Batista's looking at a colleague who's not much of a talker. LaGuerta's looking at somebody she fancies. Dokes is the only one who senses anything, and it takes Dokes 2 seasons to build it into anything more than a stare. Brian looks at him for about 5 minutes and sees the whole thing. Now, all right, he had an advantage. He knew who Dexter was. He was there in the container. He'd been watching him for a while. There's a photograph of Dexter that Brian took, which Dexter finds and burns, which is a detail I love because it's the only time in the season Dexter's the one being surveilled and he doesn't like it at all. But the read isn't about the family connection. The read is about the performance. And Brian's entire position, the thing he keeps coming back to, is this. It's fake. All of it. The job, the girlfriend, the smile, the donuts, the sister. It's a costume, and you're the only one who knows you're wearing it, and you're paying for it every single day. And he's right. That's the thing. He's just right. The whole show agrees with him. Dexter's own internal monologue in the pilot describes himself as empty inside while looking into a donut box, which is possibly the least subtle thing the show ever did, but does rather make the point. He's right that the code is a leash. He's right that it's somebody else's rules, that Harry sat down and wrote a set of conditions for how Dexter is allowed to exist and then died, and Dexter has been dutifully obeying a dead man ever since. Brian's pitch is essentially, those aren't your rules. Why are you following them? And he's right about Deb. This is the one that gets me. Brian works out in season 1 in about 10 episodes that Deborah Morgan is the anchor, that she's the thing keeping the costume on, that Dexter cannot be what he actually is while she's alive and in his life because she's the reason the performance has to continue. And so Brian does the most efficient thing anyone in the show ever does. He doesn't attack the fortress. He goes for the foundation. He seduces her. He gets engaged adjacent to her. He puts her on the table. And he offers Dexter the knife. And Dexter says no and kills him instead and stages it as a suicide. Now, season 8. Deb is the reason it all comes apart. Deb catching him in the church is the beginning of the end. Deb shooting La Huerta is the moment the code stops meaning anything. Deb's death is what finally breaks him into a man who drives a boat into a hurricane. Every single thing Brian said about Deb turns out to be structurally correct. He was off by 7 seasons and dead right about the mechanism. And here's the tell that Dexter knows it. Brian is the only person Dexter can't lie to. He's also one of the ones who comes back as a hallucination, as a vision, turning up in season 6 and season 7 to sit in the passenger seat and say the things Dexter won't let himself say. You don't get haunted by people who are wrong about you. You get haunted by the ones who had your number. There's a doll's head in Dexter's desk drawer in season 1. He takes it out and looks at it and worries that the real ice truck killer is going to disappear on him. And that's a strange thing for the protagonist to be worried about, isn't it? The killer's about to vanish and Dexter's upset about it. That's not a police officer's concern, that's loneliness. So Brian makes the offer, and the only reason Dexter says no is Harry's conditioning. That's it. That's the only reason. Not morality, Dexter doesn't have any. Not love, exactly, though it's the closest thing, it's the training. And by season 8, the show has quietly come round to the position that the training was the problem, which means the thing that saved Dexter from Brian is the thing that made Dexter in the first place. Both of those men were right about him. Neither of them got to enjoy it. Let me be upfront about season 8 because I think you have to be. A neuropsychiatrist arrives in Miami in the final season and announces that she co-wrote the code, that Harry came to her when Dexter was a boy, and that the entire foundational myth of the show had a second author nobody's ever mentioned in 7 years of television. That's a big swing. A lot of people hated it. I understand why. It's the sort of retcon that asks you to unremember things. I want to talk about her anyway, because underneath the retcon, there's a character who is right about something nobody else in the show is willing to say out loud. And I'll say up front that I think she's a better character than the season she's in deserved, and that the reason she doesn't land isn't the retcon at all. It's that she arrives too late to be tested. If she'd turned up in season 4, if she'd been standing in the room while Trinity was happening, if she'd had to watch her own theory collide with a woman in a bathtub, that's a show. That's a properly good show. As it is, she gets 1 season, 1 revelation, 1 very neat piece of irony, and then she's gone before anyone can put a hand on her. Vogel's position, and she never really wavers from it, is this: the code worked. And I think when you actually look at it on her terms, and her terms are clinical, they're not moral, she is not remotely interested in the moral question and never pretends to be, she's correct. She looks at Dexter and she sees an outcome. Here is a psychopath. Untreatable by the standards of her field, identified in childhood. And instead of a life of escalating chaos ending in an institution or an execution chamber by the age of 25, here he is, employed, functional, socially integrated, undetected, holding down a job in law enforcement of all places, raising a child, going to work, bringing donuts, for years and years on end. That is, on her own terms, a remarkable result. And she's the only person who ever says so. Everyone else in this script who worked out what Dexter is has been horrified by it. Dokes was disgusted, Rita would have been devastated, Deb was destroyed, LaGuerta wanted him in a cell, Astor wanted him gone. Vogel is delighted. That's what makes her properly unsettling, and I don't think the show ever quite cashes it in. She's not frightened of him, she's proud of him. She looks at the most dangerous man in Miami and she sees a paper she should have published. And there's a second thing in her position that I think is smarter than it looks, which is what she implies about Harry without ever quite saying it. Harry couldn't have done this on his own. That's the actual content of the retcon, once you strip the surprise off it. A detective, a good one, a determined one, but a detective does not have the equipment to look at a damaged child and build a functioning behavioral architecture around him. He hasn't got the training, he hasn't got the vocabulary, he hasn't got the first idea what he's dealing with. What Harry had was an instinct and a horror, and a boy in the house, and what he needed was somebody who'd read the literature. And when you put it like that, it stops being a retcon and starts being the only way the thing could ever have worked. The code is too good. It's too well designed. It has contingencies in it. Somebody sat down and thought about failure modes. That isn't a bereaved policeman at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. That's a professional. So Vogel's real claim is that she helped. It's that without her, Harry's version of this ends in about 18 months with a boy in a cell and a father who can't explain himself. And I think she's right about that. And I think it's the least comfortable thing anybody says in season 8, because it means the code, the thing the whole show is built on, the thing Dexter recites to himself like scripture, was a clinical intervention with a co-author who was never in the credits. She's also right about Harry in the other sense, and this is the bit I actually rate. She saw it coming. She understood before it happened that Harry couldn't survive having made this, that the guilt was going to arrive and there'd be nowhere to put it. She watched the author of the thing start to come apart under the weight of the thing, and she was right. He did. He took the heart medication. She could diagnose that from across a room. She could look at a colleague and see the ending. And then there's her son, and this is the shape of the whole section. So let me put it as cleanly as I can. Evelyn Vogel could look at somebody else's child from a professional distance with no personal stake and read him perfectly down to the details for 20 years. And she could not see her own son at all, not remotely. He was right there, and she missed him entirely, and it killed her. That's the same failure Harry had with Spencer, exactly the same. Total accuracy at distance, total blindness at zero range. And it's not a coincidence that the show keeps doing this, because it's the thing the show is actually about. You cannot run a profile on someone you love. Vogel is just the most extreme version of it, because she of all people had the training. She had the literal professional qualification in seeing this specific thing. And it didn't help, not even slightly, but she's one of the only people in the entire run who was right about Dexter and didn't mind. And I find that stranger than any of the villains. There's a printer in a police station in a town of about 2,000 people, and it's printing an obituary. The obituary is for Dexter Morgan. I love that image. Such an unglamorous way to catch a man. No corridor confrontation, no corkboard, no gun drawn in a swamp. A chief of police sits down at a computer, has a thought, types a name, and the machine prints out the fact that the bloke she's been sleeping with has been legally dead for years. Angela Bishop is the franchise's answer to James Dokes, and she gets every single thing that Dokes never got. Let me explain what I mean, because it's the most interesting structural thing New Blood does. Dokes had the instinct and no evidence. LaGuerta had the evidence and no time. Angela has both, and she has something neither of them had. which is a jurisdiction small enough to actually finish a case in. Think about what Miami Metro was, a machine. Hundreds of people, dozens of open files, 2 separate ranks playing politics at each other, and a serial killer sitting in forensics with his hands on the evidence. Dexter didn't hide from that institution, he hid inside it. Iron Lake's police department has a chief, a sergeant, and a dispatcher named Esther. There's nowhere to hide in that because there isn't enough of it to hide in. And that, I think, is the reason New Blood works better than people gave it credit for at the time. The joke for the whole of the original run was that nobody ever catches him. It was a running gag. It was the thing you accepted as the price of admission. The way you accept that nobody notices Superman wears glasses. And New Blood takes that joke, hands the case to a competent person with a small caseload and no reason to protect anyone. And the joke stops being funny almost immediately. Because that's what he was relying on. That's all he was ever relying on. Not brilliance, not the code, volume. He needed a city big enough to get lost in and an institution busy enough not to look up. Put him somewhere the chief of police has 3 cases and knows everybody's mother, and he lasts about 10 days. And the other bit I find clever, Angela is the only investigator in the franchise who isn't emotionally disqualified by Dexter's design. And he tried. The relationship was the cover. That was the point of it. Same play he ran on Rita, same play he ran on the entire building in Miami. And it didn't take. She trusted him. And then she stopped on evidence in about an afternoon. Now let me actually walk the chain. Because it's the only complete investigation anybody ever runs on this man, and it deserves the time. It starts with Matt Caldwell, and it starts with Kurt lying. Kurt tells everyone he's spoken to Matt, that Matt's fine, that Matt's in New York. So Angela goes and gets the hotel footage, and the person on the footage isn't Matt. And that's the first thread, and it's a good one. And notice what she does with it. She doesn't go, oh, Kurt's mistaken. She goes, why would Kurt lie about this? Then Audrey, Harrison, off his head at a party, tells Audrey that his father's name isn't really Jim Lindsay. And Audrey, who's frightened she's in trouble, tells her mom, and Angela hugs her and says she's not angry, and then goes and sits down at a computer. And then the traffic stop, which is the best scene in New Blood, and I'll fight anyone about it. She pulls him over, same setup as the first episode, where she pulled him over and it turned into a laugh and then into sex in the car. And she asks for his license and registration, and he does the joke, yes, mistress, because he thinks he knows what this is. And she says, not the one for Jim Lindsay, the one for Dexter Morgan. Follow me to the station. That's a fantastic scene. Genuinely, it's the moment the show turns over, and it turns over on a woman using the same 6 words a traffic cop uses every day. And then it keeps going, which is the part that separates her from everyone else in this script. She doesn't stop at the identity. She's got the titanium screw, she's got the anonymous letter in her mailbox saying Jim Lindsay killed Matt Caldwell. And then she goes to Molly Park's hotel room and finds the camera gear locked in the safe. And that's the detail that shows you how good she is. Anyone can look at an empty hotel room and go, she checked out. Angela looks at it and knows Molly would never in her life have left that gear behind. That's not forensics, that's knowing a person. And she does something about it. She calls in the missing person. She listens to Molly's unreleased podcast in the car. She's driving to the scene of a burned cabin with the whole thing assembled in her head. And I've been talking about the Dexter case as if that's the only thing she was right about, and it isn't. And honestly, the other one is the better story. There's a woman called Miriam out on Seneca land, and Angela hasn't been out that way in a while, and she turns up because she's got a list of people to talk to about Matt Caldwell. And Miriam mentions her daughter, Iris. Iris went missing years ago. Iris was Angela's best friend growing up, and nobody ever did anything about it. That's the whole thing. A girl vanished, and the machinery that's supposed to engage when a girl vanishes simply didn't engage. And everyone got on with their lives, and Angela never let it go. That's the bit of her people missed. She's not a cop who happens to stumble onto a serial killer while looking for a missing hunter. She's a woman who spent her whole adult life quietly certain that girls had been going missing out of that town, and nobody was looking, and who then became chief of police, which is roughly the only available way of doing something about it. She was right. She was right for decades about something nobody else in Iron Lake wanted to think about. And she was right for exactly the same reason Dokes was right, because she knew a person and she knew that person wouldn't have just gone, and she refused to unsee it. And when she opens Molly Park's hotel safe and finds camera equipment that Molly would never have left behind, that isn't a new skill. That's the same instinct she's had since she was a teenager. Somebody is missing. People are telling me a story about why. The story is wrong. The Dexter thing is almost a side effect of that. She wasn't hunting him. She was hunting the thing she'd been hunting her whole life, and he happened to be standing next to it, wearing a name that didn't hold up. And here's the bit that stays with me. Dokes had the instinct and got a cage. La Huerta had the evidence and got shot. Angela had both, and she got to finish it. And I don't think it's because she was better than either of them. It's because nobody killed her first, right? Here's the uncomfortable one, and I've been looking forward to it, which probably says something about me. Kurt Caldwell was right. Jim Lindsay killed his son. He said so, out loud, in writing. He put an anonymous letter in the chief of police's mailbox that said, in plain English, Jim Lindsay killed Matt Caldwell, and he put a titanium screw in with it. And he was completely, entirely, 100% correct. Nobody believed him. Now look at the shape of this, because it is a genuinely strange thing for a television program to do with its antagonist, and I don't think it gets nearly enough credit. Kurt Caldwell is a serial killer. He has an underground room with 30 women in it, preserved as trophies. He is one of the more upsetting villains the franchise ever produced, and I'm going to handle that material at a distance tonight because you're trying to sleep and I'm not putting the preservation room in your head at 1 a.m. Nightmare fuel. Genuinely. Moving on. He is also a father whose son actually was murdered by his neighbor, who buried the body, dug it back up, took the orange vest off it, reburied it, and then dragged that vest through the woods to fake a trail leading up to the highway where the glove was found. That happened. Dexter did that. And Kurt's read on it, my son is dead, that man killed him. And this police department is not going to find out, is not paranoia. It's not grief madness. It's just a correct account of events. And there's a scene that I think about a lot, where Kurt rings Angela and he's furious with her. He's angry that she didn't do better earlier in the investigation. He's demanding better police work. He's a grieving parent on the phone telling the chief of police that she's not doing enough to find who killed his boy. And he's right, she wasn't. Nobody was. That's an extraordinary position for a show to put you in. You're watching a monster demand justice correctly from an institution that is failing him on behalf of a genuine victim, while the actual murderer stands about 40 feet away pretending to help with the search and bringing out coffee. And the second thing he's right about is worse, and it's the one that properly sticks. He clocks Harrison immediately. He sees the kid walking down the street. He asks where he's going. He offers to buy him a hot meal. And they sit there and Kurt gives him advice about handling rage. And it's not bad advice, that's the horrible part. And then he hands him a job application for the diner. And Kurt Caldwell, a murderer, is at that moment the only adult in Iron Lake who has correctly identified that this boy is in serious trouble and has done a single practical thing about it. Meanwhile, Dexter won't sign the form. Harrison asks his father to sign a job application, and Dexter says, sorry, no. And Harrison entirely reasonably points out that he didn't go to therapy the night before, he talked to Kurt instead, and that Dexter should probably be thanking him. That's a hell of an exchange. Nobody in it is behaving well. Personal opinion, and it's the point of the whole section. What Kurt demonstrates better than anyone else in this script is that being right about the crime in front of you is not remotely the same thing as mattering. Nobody was ever going to act on that letter, not because it was wrong, because of who wrote it. He's a man with a reputation, a temper, a strange manner, a history nobody quite likes, and eventually a very good reason for the police to stop taking anything he says at face value. The correct information had the wrong author, so it went nowhere. And there's something almost funny about the fact that the one thing Kurt Caldwell could never get anyone to believe was the one thing that was true. And there's one more thing he was right about, and it's the sort of thing you only spot on a second watch. Kurt worked out that Dexter did it before anybody had told him anything. Nobody handed him that. There was no evidence. The body was buried, dug up, reburied, and the trail was faked. Angela was still running a missing persons case on a hunter who'd wandered off. Kurt looked at a man who lived out by the hunting grounds near where his son was last seen, who'd been perfectly pleasant to everyone, who'd offered coffee to the search party, and he decided it was him. And he was correct, and he had exactly as much to go on as Dokes had in that corridor, which is to say nothing at all except a feeling about a man's face. 15 of them, 15 years apart, 1,000 miles apart in completely different lives. Both looked at Dexter Morgan and just knew. And both of them happened to be the sort of person nobody was ever going to believe. That's not a coincidence, I don't think. The people who can spot him are people who've done something themselves. It takes one to know one, which is a horrible thing for a show to be quietly arguing and which it never once says out loud. He tried a letter, he tried a phone call, he tried burning the man's house down with a power hose full of petrol, which I'd argue is where he loses the moral high ground on the whole complaint. And none of it worked, because he'd already spent his credibility on being himself. The show never lets him have it. He dies, not knowing that Angela was, at that exact moment, 3 or 4 steps from proving him right. There's a moment in New Blood that I didn't clock the first time, and that now seems to me like the whole show. Harrison tells his dad he took the placement exam again, and he got an even higher score, and Dexter says, "Congrats." Dexter's entire response was, "I guess, so congrats." Dexter's entire reply was, "I guess, so congrats." He's on his way into the bathroom. He's got other things on. Congrats. I mention it because everything else about this section is heavy, and I want to start somewhere small because the small stuff is where Harrison actually lives. This is a kid who's been trying to get his father's attention for the entire series and keeps getting the wrong kind of it, right? So, what was Harrison right about? Everyone else in this script worked out what Dexter Morgan is. That's what they had in common. Dokes saw it in a corridor. La Guerta assembled it out of a piece of glass. Rita sensed it the whole way through. Brian recognized it in 5 minutes. Angela printed it off a computer. Harrison worked out something none of them did, which is what it meant going forward. It was never going to stop. That's the argument. That's the whole thing. Not my father's a killer. He gets there, obviously. But so did half of Miami. The thing Harrison gets that nobody else gets is that this is not a fact about the past. It's a prediction about the future. There is no version of this where the man puts it down and stays put down. There is no ending where it gets managed. Deb worked out that it couldn't be contained, but Deb worked it out about a man who was already fully formed. Harrison worked it out about a man who had just spent 10 years successfully containing it. In a cabin, in the snow, with a calendar on the wall. And that's the bit. Dexter had the calendar. He marked off every day he didn't do it. 10 years of a man trying to prove that he could stop. And then his son turns up and it takes about a week. Look at what Harrison actually had to go on. Because it's not ambiguous. And I think people talk about the ending as though he was making a leap. He wasn't making a leap. He had a case. He watched his father dismember Kurt Caldwell. Not heard about it, watched it, stood there. He heard his father say, When Harrison asked how many times he'd done this, that it had been in the hundreds. He watched him kill Jasper and stage it as an overdose, which is not the same trick, by the way, that got played on dokes in a cabin 15 years earlier. Make the death read as the victim's own doing. Same man, same move, he never stopped using it. And he heard the confession that was meant to land as devotion and lands, if you're standing where Harrison's standing, as something else entirely. Dexter admits he killed the Trinity killer as revenge for what he did to Rita. Think about what that actually sounds like from inside that kitchen. Your father's telling you he murdered a man to avenge your mother. That's meant to be the tender bit. That's meant to be the thing that brings you together. And what you're actually hearing is, my father has been killing people since before I was born. He killed one because of my mom. And he's telling me about it in the same voice he uses to talk about the goats. And then there's the moment, the one I think is the show in one beat. Harrison sees the blood, and he has the flashback, the bathtub, his mother, the 2 inches of it, him sitting in it. And he goes outside for some air. That's it. That's the whole architecture of the thing exposed in about 4 seconds. Because what did Harry do? Harry looked at a boy sitting in his mother's blood in a shipping container and built a code around it. And what did Dexter build? Dexter built a life, a cover, an entire operation, all of it justified, in his own head, in the narration, over and over, as being for his son, protecting Harrison, keeping Harrison safe. That was the story, and the thing he built to protect his son is made out of the exact material that broke him. It's the same substance, it's the same room. It's a boy standing in the blood watching his father cut a man up. And the only difference between 1973 and 2021 is which one of them is holding the knife. He's not horrified by the killing, though. That's what I find genuinely uncomfortable about Harrison and what makes him more than just a moral object. Because when they find Kurt's underground room and the 30 women in it, Harrison's response is not to call the police. His response is that Kurt needs to die too. He says it. And when Dexter says he's done this in the hundreds of times, Harrison looks something close to proud and tells him he's saved thousands of lives. That's Harrison at his most Dexter. And it's also, I think, the exact moment the argument gets settled in his head. Because he's just felt it. He's just had a go at the family business and discovered that it fits. He's not frightened of what his father is. He's frightened of the inheritance. And that's a different thing, and it's a much more specific thing, and it's the reason he does what he does. Every other person in this script wanted Dexter stopped for the sake of the victims, or the case, or the truth, or the job. Harrison wanted it stopped for the sake of himself. He'd looked down the corridor and seen the whole of it, the code, the rules, the boat, the calendar, the marking off of days, a whole life spent being managed by a dead man's paperwork. And he decided he wasn't doing it, so he ended it. And he ended it with his father's consent, which is the detail that makes it work. Dexter agrees. Dexter, at the last, finally arrives at the conclusion Astor reached on a curb outside a block of flats when she was 12. You'd all be better off without me. It only took him a decade and a bit to act on it, and even then he needed someone else to do the acting. Now, I'll be straight with you about one thing because I'd rather flag it than have you shout at the screen. Resurrection subsequently establishes that he survived the shot and was resuscitated in an emergency room. That's the franchise's business, and there's a whole other conversation to have about it, and I'd like to have it once there's enough of the show to talk about properly. But I don't think it changes this section, and here's why. Harrison didn't win an outcome, he won an argument. He was the one person in the entire run who correctly identified that his father was never going to stop. And the one person who did something about it instead of writing it in a notebook or filing a report or sitting in a basement waiting for him to explain. Whether the man got back up afterwards is a different question to whether the kid was right. Personal opinion, and then I'll leave him. Everyone else in this script who was right about Dexter Morgan got killed, or framed, or discredited, or ignored, or exiled, or told they were emotional. Every single one. It's a completely unbroken run. The kid was right, and the kid shot him. That's not a triumph. Nobody's cheering. It's a 16-year-old on a floor with a gun and a father who appeared to be dead, which is about the least triumphant image available to television. But it is, as far as I can tell, the only time in the whole thing that being right about this man actually counted for anything at all. I want to flag a few before I wind this down, because there are more of these than I could fit, and some of them probably deserved a full go. Angel Batista. He was right about Lila, and here's the joke. The person who warned him was Dexter. Dexter told him she was using him on his way out of the building, and Batista ignored it and carried on seeing her after hours. And Dexter was completely correct. And the reason Dexter was correct is that Dexter was the one she was actually using him to get to. Batista was also right about Dokes' character, right to the very end, right while shouting it in a police station at a lieutenant holding a correct file. Right about the man. Wrong about the facts. That's a rough way to be loyal. Tom Matthews built the entire profile on a boat while hanging Christmas lights and then decided he'd rather not have. I've said my bit. It's the most Miami Metro thing that ever happened, and I love it, and it makes me want to lie down. Vince Masuka, right that the propane couldn't have been an accident, that a man that careful would never leak gas into a room with an open flame. Perfect reasoning, catastrophic conclusion. He's the one who actually sealed it, and he did it by being good at his job, and he never knew. Lumen Pierce, right that the Barrel Girls case was a group and not a man. Right that the police weren't going to get there, and they weren't. They'd already excluded Cole Harmon from the suspect list until Deb dug him back out. And right about Dexter in the most complete way anyone's ever been right about him, because she looked directly at what he was and was entirely fine with it, which is its own kind of correct, and I've never been sure how to feel about it. Miguel Prado, right that the system was letting killers walk. That's not a paranoid position, that's just Miami. His diagnosis was sound and his prescription was a catastrophe, which is precisely the same mistake Harry made, and I think the show knew that. Two men look at the same broken system, both conclude somebody has to do something, and both of them end up feeding it. Molly Park, right about Kurt, right about Iron Lake, right that there was a story there. Podcaster instincts, which the show is a bit sniffy about and which turn out to be correct. Logan and Audrey, the two people in that town who kept correctly clocking that Harrison was in trouble. Audrey called the ambulance. Logan kept telling him to stay with him. Neither of them had any information, and both of them had the right instinct, which is more than his father managed. Hannah Mouquet, right about Dexter, obviously, in a way that's a bit boring because she was the same thing. But also right about one specific thing that I think is underrated, that Deb was never going to let go. That it was always going to come to a choice, and that Dexter would eventually make the wrong one. She told him he should have killed her. She was right about that too, from her side of it. Tanya Martin and Doris Morgan, the quiet noticers in Original Sin. Tanya spots the eye for detail immediately and hands him the internship, which is a small act of kindness with a very long tail. And then the one that I very nearly gave a full section to and that I might come back to. Maria LaGuerta in 1991. Because Original Sin does something with her that reframes everything I said earlier, and hardly anyone's talking about it. Young LaGuerta, a uniform, files a report. She thinks there's a serial killer working in Miami. And Harry Morgan, who knows precisely who's doing it, because it's the son he's training, dismisses her report in a conversation with LaGuerta back then, while Batista later dismisses her concerns in the present. And she overhears it. She's standing there, and she walks away disappointed. 20 years apart, two different Morgan men, same report, more or less, same dismissal. She was right in 1991, and she was right in 2012, and both times she got told by a Morgan that it was nothing, and both times it was the same killer. So that's 14 of them, give or take. We've been at this a good while, so I'll bring it in slowly. I'm not going to land on some grand conclusion because there isn't one waiting. Here's the thing I said I'd come back to at the start, and then I'll leave you alone. We watched this entire show through the eyes of the one man in it with a reason to make all these people look wrong. That's not a clever reading. That's just the mechanics of it. Dexter narrates. Dexter chooses the frame. And so Dokes comes across as unhinged because Dexter finds him inconvenient. LaGuardia comes across as obsessive because Dexter needs her to be. Quinn's a bitter cop with a chip on his shoulder. Rita's a lovely woman who doesn't quite keep up. Deb's emotional. Astor's a difficult teenager. Kurt's a lunatic with a grudge. Every one of those characterizations was supplied to you by the defendant. And on a rewatch, and this is the actual reason I do rewatches, honestly, you stop watching Dexter and you start watching The Room. And The Room is full of competent people doing their jobs correctly, being quietly overruled by a voice that only you can hear. The other thing I keep turning over, and I think it's the real difference between this show and the other long runners I've talked about on here, is the shape of the dismissal. In most of these stories, the person who's right gets voted down. There's a group, there's a table, there's an argument, and the correct person loses the room. That's a fair picture of how it works in life, I think. Dexter's sadder than that and stranger because there's no table. Nobody ever voted on it. Almost every single person who was right about that man was someone he had personally, deliberately, over years, made sure liked him. That's the design. That's the whole design. Dokes was the only one who didn't take the donut, and Dokes was the only one who saw it, and I don't think those two facts are in any way separate. No one else in that building had exactly the same evidence Dokes had. They didn't have more, none of them. They didn't have years of it. What they didn't have was the willingness to look at the bloke who remembered your kid's name and think, hang on, the code's real innovation wasn't the plastic or the boat or the slides or the rules about proof. Harry taught him how to select and how to dispose. And that's the bit everyone remembers. But the thing that kept him free for 8 seasons of television wasn't any of that. It was the donuts. It was being pleasant. It was being the sort of man that competent people would rather not run a profile on. He didn't beat Miami Metro. He was adopted by it. He was somebody's foster son and somebody's brother and somebody's boyfriend and somebody's colleague and everybody's mate from the lab. And every one of those relationships was a wall. And he built all of them on purpose, and they held. And when it finally went, in a small town with a chief of police who had 3 cases and a printer, it went in about 10 days. Anyway, I've got a few more of these in me if you're interested. The characters who were wrong all along is the obvious companion piece, and I've been making notes, though I suspect that one runs long and gets a bit mean. There's a proper Original Sin rewatch I want to do because I don't think anybody's given it a fair go, and there's more in it than people think. And I'd like to do a Resurrection one eventually, once there's enough of it to say anything useful about. Right, I've talked plenty for one evening. If you went under somewhere around Camilla's basement, good. That was rather the idea. And if you're somehow still here with me at the end of it, take the donut. Everyone else did.